Let's welcome back to the show retired Army Lieutenant Colonel James Carafano. Colonel, it's great to have you back on. Your thoughts on the Trump administration today sanctioning? It's great to see you again. The White House, the administration rather, sanctioning more than 24 people and entities involved in Iran's nuclear and arms programs. Your reaction? They're thought to be working with North Korea on a long-range missile. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, sir, this is the big headline on the reimposition of sanctions, particularly the arms sanctions, the so-called snapback that the U.S. is doing, that I just don't think has gotten enough attention. These aren't just, we're going to go back to the sanctions regime that the UN had in place before we did the Iran deal. The way the United States has written these are very clever. They're much more flexible. They're much more broad-based. So the U.S. can actually be much, much more aggressive. They can't just say, oh, you did an arms deal, we're going to sanction you. They can actually go out and sanction people who are talking about an arms deal. And anybody supporting them, they can sanction them. So what this will allow the U.S. to do is to be much more aggressive and much more heavy-handed, and also go more quickly after people trying to find workarounds. So this is actually going to put Iranians, in terms of an arms embargo, in a worse place they were than before they signed the arms deal.
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, the UN embargo against arms deals with Iran expires next month, but you're saying this is a pretty elastic, flexible one. It's smart, right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, not only is it broader and more aggressive than the original U.S. sanctions and the way the U.S. plans to implement it, the reality is look, everybody's going to follow them. You know, the Russians and the Chinese can complain. The Iranians can dismiss them. You know, people can whine. They can say, oh, these are illegitimate. The reality is no legitimate company is going to risk doing business with the Iranians because of all the pain they're going to have. And Iran doesn't have enough money to make it worthwhile. So what's going to happen is people are going to look for shadowy runarounds, and the U.S. will track them down. But these arms sanctions are probably really going to be effective, and they'll be just as effective as, probably more effective than the ones were in place when the Iranians were forced to the table the first time.
Colonel, President Trump is expected to sharply criticize Iran when he addresses the United Nations General Assembly this week. We had former top Obama official John Kerry. We showed a clip last week of John Kerry in 2016 saying there will never be a Mideast peace deal with any Arab country. And Israel, that was proven to be wrong. We know that John Kerry, Tim Kaine, Susan Rice have really pushed back hard, saying there will be chaos and catastrophe if you do things like move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, if you do that airstrike against, the drone strike against Soleimani, the former general who was basically taken out by the Trump administration. The Democrats have said that the president's policies will lead to chaos and apocalypse. That was one quote. In the Mideast. That hasn't happened. Instead, we have peace deals between the UAE, Bahrain, and Israel, which the Democrats said would never happen. What's your take on how the Democrats are now pushing back hard on his address to the UN this week? On the president's address.
Yeah, look, I mean, the critics were double stupid. The first stupid was they believed this myth that nothing could happen in the region unless Iran and Palestine had a deal, and then everything was possible. I mean, that was always wrong. And it was just waiting for somebody to come along and challenge that premise. So that's how they were wrong. And the second way they were wrong is we are not in the world, even 6, 7, 8 years ago when Obama was dealing with Iran. The world has moved on. We're in an era of great power competition. What matters is what's China doing, what is Russia doing, Iran is both of them. And so the region wants to be protected against these powers, and they want to be at peace. And they see the United States stepping forward as the only logical partner for that.
Interesting. Lieutenant Colonel, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, Colonel.
Anytime.
And thank you so much for your service to our country. Great to have you back on.